Just over 1,000 years ago, in the year 1009, a dramatic decision made in Cairo changed the course of world history. That was when the Caliph el-Hakim issued a fateful order from the throne of his Islamic empire. He declared that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site in the Christian world, would be destroyed. The move was part of the eccentric ruler's persecution of non-Muslims, and even of Muslims with whom he disagreed. The ancient church, built on what Christians believe is the site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, was demolished on his command, setting into motion a chain of events far away that the ruler in Cairo couldn't have imagined. At this time, for most European Christians of the 11th century, Jerusalem was little more than a myth, a legendary city known from stories in the New Testament. But when news of the church's destruction arrived from far to the east, they suddenly realized that this was a real place, and they were spurred to act. The church's destruction on the orders of the Muslim caliph became the trigger for the string of military campaigns we know as the Crusades, the effort by Western Christians to reconquer the Sepulchre from Islam. Answering a call from the Pope, waves of Christian foot soldiers and knights began moving eastward from Europe. It was a holy war. This was medieval times, so things didn't happen quickly. By the time the Crusader armies arrived outside the walls of Jerusalem, it was 1099, 90 years after el-Hakim's famous demolition order. The Christians won the battle for Jerusalem, founding a kingdom that lasted less than 100 years. For Jerusalem, that's just a blip on the timeline. But Crusader architects and stonemasons built furiously in those years, and their work is still present in the city today. We're in one of the most beautiful buildings left by the Crusaders, the convent of St. Anne. The abbess of the convent was well connected. She was the sister of the Crusader queen Melisende, who was an important patron of churches during her years in power. The convent owned a great deal of property beyond its walls, and this was true of other monasteries as well. Crusader Jerusalem was a city where religious orders weren't groups of meek scholars, but organizations that wielded real power. The marketplaces that we can now visit in the Christian quarter of the Old City, for example, 3 parallel market streets, were all built by monastic orders during the years of Crusader rule. The convent of St. Anne was named for the mother of Mary and the grandmother of Jesus. It's a masterpiece of Romanesque architecture. There are no partitions built later and no clumsy additions, but also no decorations. That's because after the Crusaders were defeated and ejected by the Muslim general Saladin in the year 1187, the building was turned into a madrasa, an Islamic school, and its interior was completely stripped, giving it the stark elegance we see now. As you'd expect of the capital of a Christian kingdom surrounded by Muslim enemies, Crusader Jerusalem was built to withstand attack. Remains of Crusader fortifications can still be seen throughout the city. For example, between what is now City Hall and the Jaffa Gate, just past a lovely lawn, are the remains of Tancred's Tower, named after one of the Crusader commanders who stormed the city in 1099. Tancred, who was a Norman knight, led the assault from this side, the city's western flank. But the most important structure in Crusader times was the newly rebuilt Church of the Holy Sepulchre, whose destruction had led to the crusade in the first place. The church that visitors flock to today is still the one built by the Crusaders. Construction took several generations, and builders did what builders in Jerusalem always do. They made use of bits and pieces from the generations that came before. Looking at the southern facade, for example, you can see the walls packed with reused stones. There are marble Byzantine columns taken from ruined churches, and even a section of decorative Roman stonework from the 2nd century, probably from a pagan temple that stood here in ancient times. When the new Crusader church was built, it had 2 entrances. One was later sealed off after Christian rule ended and the number of pilgrims declined. Above the entrance were 2 remarkable stone reliefs. These were removed after an earthquake hit Jerusalem in 1927, and are now housed not far away in the Rockefeller Museum. One relief shows strange creatures peeking out of a garland of flowers. The other depicts the dramatic events of what Christians call the Passion, the last episodes in the story of Jesus, from his entry into Jerusalem to his resurrection. Flanking the Crusader entrance are 12 thin columns, but these are clearly centuries older, from the Byzantine period. They were found elsewhere and put to new use. One particularly beautiful aspect of these pillars was never intended by the architects. The way they're covered in a kind of ancient graffiti, small crosses and inscriptions in the languages spoken by centuries of pilgrims: Armenian, Arabic, Slavic tongues, Latin, Syriac. The inscriptions are usually just the name of a person grateful to have reached the holy site. Today, specialists are documenting them in detail, finding that they contain a wealth of information. There are dates, places of origin, and the professions of pilgrims. Many were clergy, but there are also merchants, traders, craftsmen, and members of the nobility who left heraldic symbols and coats of arms. In Crusader times, travel to and from Jerusalem was a perilous business, and pilgrims had to brave robbers and brigands. Crusader authorities did their best to guard the roads, building small forts that can still be seen. One is to the west of Jerusalem, on the road to the Mediterranean, called Aqua Bella. Another is to the east, toward the Dead Sea, called Castel Rouge. There are many other Crusader forts in Galilee, across the Jordan River, and beyond. Road protection was mainly the responsibility of an order of fighting monks, the Teutonic Knights. Military orders like this one were the pillars of the Crusader kingdom. Two orders were founded here in the Holy Land: the Hospitallers and the Templars. The Hospitallers were responsible for welcoming pilgrims. Their headquarters in Jerusalem, near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is an area now called the Moristan. The Hospitallers also operated two large churches. One was called Santa Maria Latina. The second was Santa Maria Grande, part of which can still be seen today inside this modern Lutheran church. Today, the Hospitaller headquarters at the Moristan consists of a small square with a fountain, with market streets branching outward. These look old, but by Jerusalem standards, they're brand new, dating to the 1800s. Not much of what remains on this site was built by the Crusaders, because after the Christians were driven out, the city continued to evolve, and newer layers covered the older ones. Nearly no Crusader homes survive in Jerusalem at all. But that doesn't mean there aren't traces, if you look carefully. Like these two lions. 800 years ago, they guarded the buildings frequented by the Hospitaller Knights as they tended to Christian pilgrims and ventured out on missions for the Crusader kings and queens. The knights are long gone, but the two lions stayed on to remind us of the warriors who came from far away and wrote a short but dramatic chapter in the history of Jerusalem.